I'm thrilled to welcome Kelly Duer to the show. Kelly works with Maddie's Fund, supporting foster care initiatives and community based programs for shelters and rescues. Her work focuses on practical ways to help foster parents feel supported and set animals up for successful outcomes. Hi, and welcome to Dog Fostering 101. I'm Jackie Adams, foster mom and learning and development professional. This podcast is for anyone who's new to fostering, thinking about saying yes for the first time, or navigating those early days and looking for practical tips, because fostering changes lives at both ends of the leash. So, Kelly, from a national perspective, what trends are you seeing right now in foster care? What's changing in who's fostering, how they foster, or what support they need?
We've been serving foster programs at shelters and rescues since 2018 every 2 years, so we've got some really good data. What we're seeing is that shelters and rescue organizations are growing their programs and are finding that it's possible to sustain more pets in foster homes than before. And one of the things they're doing is making shorter term options for people. And this really is broadening the pool of potential fosters. So they're providing convenient options such as field trips, overnights, and weekend foster. And because of the flexibility and the time, more people are able to try it. And many of them, may have thought previously that their lifestyle didn't allow it. I will admit I am one of them. My husband and I started out as weekend fosters because we could never work, do full-time fostering. And then after several weekend fosters, we realized we actually could.
Yeah.
And then shelters and rescues are also starting to get really creative in the ways they provide support to fosters. So not just with training and emotional support, but things like transporting foster pets to vet appointments, creating conveniently located hubs in some cases for supplies, and even in some cases volunteer help with dog walking. So that's also making the potential pool of fosters much, much bigger than it used to be, and is allowing so many more people to participate.
This has been coming up, and I was actually just speaking with Jeff, another foster here in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Animal Care Control Network that I'm a part of, but how we are stronger as fosters when we co-foster or foster together. So I'm thinking about having an entire episode talking about two people like agreeing to foster a dog and sharing that responsibility, or how other ways that we can come together. But it was something that, like you mentioned, I had a very straightforward idea of this is what I can give, and it's only this. And I had really just thought that is what it's going to look like, and it has looked so differently. And I'm grateful for that flexibility when you have the support of the system coming around you.
This is such a huge. It's a huge change in the way we do foster, and it is so much better for fosters. Team fostering is something that Maddie's Fund has researched. It's something that we've tried to implement or put into practice in shelters. It's a little tricky, but when you do it, fosters are just so much more supported. They're able to kind of solve their own problems in a lot of cases. It just takes a lot of stress off the foster team, and it makes certain animals, especially pets who have behavioral needs or or some type of medical need, able to be fostered, and in some cases able to be for their lives to be able to be saved.
Yeah, and that was my experience, because I've already in past episodes have brought up Simon a couple of times. He had a horrible botch job on his ears. He came into the shelter with open wounds and actually had to be tranquilized in order to be captured, just because so many people, because of his traumatic past experiences. And then I took over his fostering from Amy. But I love that we kept in touch throughout my fostering process, so that when I was going on vacation and I needed somebody to do respite fostering for a few days, she brought him back inside his house. So that way he wouldn't have to go back to this shelter. And we could build up these successes together. And was it stressful? Were we worried that he would never get adopted? Of course, because he's a little stinker. And as he became comfortable, his stink pot personality came out. And so there's always going to be aspects of that too. Anyways, thankfully, he has a wonderful home. His mama, Lisa, is amazing, still sends me pictures to this day. And I still keep in touch with Amy and through this co-fostering experience. So I love what network comes out of that, what community comes out of that.
Absolutely. It is such a huge benefit to the fosters as well. I mean, you feel so supported. When we were fostering for Fairfax County Animal Shelter back in it was about 10 years ago, a friend of mine, there was a dog named Donnie he did terrible in the shelter. And he'd been in there and he'd been quarantined. And so he was like severely stressed. And she said she would foster him, but she lived in a townhouse with like a postage stamp size backyard. And she had another dog and they got along great. But when she walked the two of them, they would try to play and they would get like really rough. And she ended up having to tie one of them to a tree or something. She came to the rest of us volunteers and she was like, I need help. I'm not going to be able to keep him. And if I send him back to the shelter, I don't know if he's going to make it. And so we like came together and created a team. So Jamie and Rick had a house about an hour from here, and they would go on weekends and stuff. So they would do respite care. And Kat would come by a few times a week and run Donnie and just wear him out. And she brought him over to our house because we have a big fenced yard and some very friendly dogs. And he would come over and just play until he got tired. And in this way, we were able to keep him, just give him everything he needed. When one person at that time, when there wasn't one of us who could do all of it at once. He was also a dog who meeting new people was frightening for him. And so we had to introduce him in a safe way and in a good way. And we couldn't quite figure out how we wanted, what the best way would be to do that. And so we actually everybody came over to our house. We had wine. We sat around and talked about solutions for Donnie, and came up with a plan. And it was just the most positive experience. And I have to say, when I was fostering for the shelter, it was like one of the most connected I've ever been to others. It was just a great time. But because we made that plan, we were able to get him adopted to a great adopter. And his story is, I'm going to start crying. So
it does. It impacts us like that, right? And that's interesting that you all sat down. I love coming together, like having wine, coming up with a plan. I need to give credit where credit's due. With respect to Simon, I forgot to mention, I would have never met Lisa, Simon's amazing mom, in the first place if it wasn't for, we have this woman named Annalise on our team, and I should have reached out to her sooner. I think I was feeling a little bit of, I was scared. I was overwhelmed. I felt a little bit of shame because I was going to be returning Simon to the shelter, and I had already invested almost 3 months in this dog, and that was the longest foster to that time. So I was a little bit nervous and kind of maybe let's say prioritizing my own personal emotional needs over, what does this look like for Simon? But when Annalise found out that Simon would be returning to the shelter, she's a marketing guru, and we have got some amazing volunteers and fosters in Charlotte who are just really step up and devote so much of their time. And so she just went out and she marketed and created material and got him. And so I wouldn't have been connected with Lisa if it wasn't for her tremendous effort. So I do like your idea, though, of kind of planning that and coming together. Ours just kind of, it ended up that way, but that's really cool that we both have those stories of what this looked like for this dog.
Absolutely. And I think, at that point we all knew each other, but we had similar experiences in the beginning before we got to know each other.
Piggybacking off of this topic, based on Maddie's Fund's data and partnerships, what are you seeing, since we're talking about these challenges that new fosters can face, what are you all seeing from a macro level of the biggest challenges new fosters are facing? And are those different than what that looked like 5 years ago?
So our data is showing that from 2018 to 2024, foster programs, this is the good part, foster programs are making it easier for their communities to foster, and training and support for fosters is being significantly improved and expanded. More organizations have training, more organizations have really put some time into it. So that is wonderful. So access to training and things like written expectations and emergency protocols are being distributed at more organizations, which is great. Foster training is going online, increasing the ability for people to access it. Challenges in the sheltering industry, length of stay at the shelters has increased in recent years. And the longer a dog is in the shelter, the more stress they experience and trauma they endure. Not every dog gets super stressed at the shelter, but it definitely can happen, and it happens to some dogs more than others. And so this can make the transition more difficult for fosters if they're maybe doing it for the first time. And the other thing is, a lot of shelters and rescue organizations have started to market and adopt pets right from their foster homes. So previously, pets were all brought back to the shelter for adoption. And so we didn't need any kind of infrastructure for this. And this is why, at this point, many organizations are kind of struggling to put that into place. So it's great because the pets can stay in foster and won't have to go back to the shelter as often. However, it requires help from fosters and skills that you may not expect, or skills you may not have, like photography, videography, marketing, that kind of stuff. So organizations are really scrambling to put together some training and resources for fosters on how to market and adopt pets from foster. But in the meantime, we have some free courses on Maddie's University on marketing for fosters and adoption counseling and things that everybody is welcome to take. But as we kind of work into this new way of doing things, it may be a little rocky for fosters, but doable.
I did want to ask you, so we were talking about what challenges that you're seeing fosters are facing. Another challenge that I'm starting to talk to local organizations is about, one, how to attract new fosterers, but then also how to keep those fosters, make sure there's not that level of attrition. Can you, again, since you have this great data that Maddie's Fund is working with, can you talk to me about what is it that programs who are able to keep their fosterers long term, not have this kind of like compassion fatigue, burnout happening? What do you think they're doing well that other programs can learn from?
Luckily, we do have a lot of wonderful data on this. One of the most important things for foster retention is providing training to fosters that they feel is adequate. And the bar is not that high because there are many organizations who are not providing training at all. So, providing training that they, get something out of is really one of the biggest keys. Also, communicating with them regularly, providing them with not only the support from the organization, but peer-to-peer support, like we were talking about earlier. That may come in the form of a foster mentor, or an online group where fosters can ask questions and talk to each other, regular get-togethers, and other types of things like that. As to foster recruitment, one of the things that we found that is really important is for foster program growth is that organizations are welcoming fosters, and where the wait time between signing up and taking a pet home is as short as possible. So what we found is that the organizations that have the largest foster programs have the shortest amount of time from sign up to taking a pet home. So if your process can be done in 24 hours or less, you have actually hundreds more fosters looking at the data than organizations that say take 2 weeks to do that.
That makes complete sense to me because when I saw Hercules, my first foster dog, I remember submitting my application, and then I'm pretty sure within the next like 3 hours, I had checked my email to see if it had gotten accepted or not. Because he was under stress at the shelter. He had been losing weight. Unfortunately, he was doing like poop play or poop painting, whatever. This poor dog had been, was not had been traumatized before coming to the shelter, and then in the shelter he was not doing well with the stress. And if I a new foster, I'd been given time, then my brain would have started going, and I would have thought, oh, am I really ready for this? When will I ever be ready? What am I doing? All these different things. But in that moment, that story had touched me, and I thought, I can do something now in some capacity. And that allowed me to kind of jump into my first experience.
Right.
And because experience is going to, I mean, luckily, like you're saying, we have more resources like this online training, like this podcast, etc. And also sometimes you need to just get some exposure to it to understand what fostering's like.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that what is scary is that sometimes organizations don't have the time to respond to somebody, instantaneously. But what I fear is happening is people are thinking the organization doesn't need me, and so they're applying to somebody else. And so I think it also dovetails with findings from child foster, which is basically like delayed responses to inquiries and stringent requirements to become a child's foster are barriers that adversely affect recruitment efforts. Another thing I've seen a lot is organizations that have foster like front and center on their website. Like people go to their page and they're like, oh, this organization values foster, and they can just click on it and learn about it and sign up online. Those organizations are generally the ones who are bringing in a lot more fosters because it's just easier for people to find the information.
I like that low barrier to entry. And like you said, that is unfortunate that sometimes because a shelter might be overwhelmed because there's so much intake, there's so much going on that they won't be able to follow up. But just one thing that I love about the Charlotte Mecklenburg staff is even when they're making requests, they start out their emails with that gratitude. And so it feels easier to take in as a foster. I feel less exhausted when you open up that email and they say, hey, foster family, thank you so much for all you do. We wanted to make you aware of some needs if you're able to assist in this particular capacity. But I've noticed the change that I have receiving that kind of the way that it's phrased on my end.
That is so, so important. And it's one thing that I think, so, some programs, everybody is so busy. And I get it. The foster coordinator for a lot of organizations is they have 15 different hats on. They're trying to answer emails and somebody's calling. But what I think happens is they try to kind of, they're not as welcoming to fosters. They're more like, you do this, I do this. And you have to have that relationship. You have to be warm and welcoming and be responding to people in positive ways.
So we've been talking about some of the shifts, some of the changes that we're seeing overall. Are you seeing any shifts in the type of dogs entering fostering? We mentioned just a second ago that there's an uptick in owner surrenders. Are there any shifts in the behaviors or support needs that are becoming more common?
It really depends on the organization. And the reason is not because these pets are more in shelters, oddly. It's because historically foster programs were reserved for just puppies and kittens under 8 weeks and pets with medical needs who could not be in the shelter and needed somebody to care for them. So all fosters were pets that had to be outside the shelter. Now we have so much great research on foster, and it is all overwhelmingly showing that a foster is not only best for pets' well-being, but reduced stress, increased opportunities for enrichment, decreased exposure to germs. It increases the chances of pets adoption and decreases the chances of them being returned after they are adopted. So organizations are starting to use foster in different ways than they did in the past. So there are some really progressive organizations out there who have every type of pet available for foster, including healthy adult dogs who are behaviorally sound. And others are still kind of working from the old playbook, but increasingly we're seeing organizations uh, that are allowing just about every type of pet to go to foster. And it may be that this dog is able to be on a field trip, and this cat they prefer them to be in traditional longer term placement. But healthy adult pets are available for fostering in a lot of organizations now, and I think that's a really new thing. Um, Behaviors in foster, I think, it really is up to the organization. There are some organizations who do behavior foster and have a program for pets who are really stressed in the shelter or who have a history of anxiety, that kind of thing. But not every organization has one.
So, one thing that you mentioned, we have had Dr. Lisa Gunter on the show before, and I believe Maddie's Fund helped fund her research. And I love her statistic of dogs are 14 times more likely to get adopted if they're in foster care. You and I were chatting the other day, and that was the first time I heard of that information, that statistic that dogs are less likely to be returned to the shelter
Mm-hmm.
if they are in foster care. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Because again, I've been researching it. That just blew me away when you mentioned it the other day.
I've been writing the foster chapter for a veterinary book for shelters, and I've had to go through all of the research, and literally study after study, it would conclude, by the way, the pets who were in foster are significantly less likely to be returned. There's probably 8 or 9 studies that I could pull up right now that say it, and I'm sure I didn't even get to them all. I think that there are a lot of reasons for this. I think that first of all, I think most pets who are adopted from the shelter, if the organization isn't placing large numbers of pets into foster, they don't really have a whole lot of information on how the pet acts in a home. And pets can act really different in a shelter than a home. And so being able to make that match is a lot more difficult because there's just a lot of unknowns. But when a pet's in foster, the person, the foster is able to see, okay, these are where they're struggling. They're able to even come up with little answers to little problems they've run into during the day that they can then impart to the adopters. So they just have such a huge wealth of information of how this acts in a home, how they act in public, and how they walk on a leash, that they can really prepare that adopter really, really well, even if they're not even doing the adoption counseling through the organization. They could do it then. And what was interesting is that several of the studies, it almost seemed like it went by time in foster. Like the more time, I think in one study, the more time they were in foster, the lower that return rate got. And I think it's really important that we are working on having pets adopted from foster if fosters are comfortable with that. Because I do think that the adoption counseling is just so much more concrete and real. We had a dog once who we fostered, and if somebody came to the door, my husband would come home from work. He'd run up to the door. He was like a 90-pound pit bull. So it was like my husband would walk in. He would be like,
I love it.
he was so excited, but like he's big and like he's like scratching you on not on purpose. And so we were like, he likes to carry things around, so let's put a couple of toys near the door. Perfect. He would grab the toy. He would shake his little tail. He would greet my husband with all four on the floor. It was fantastic. And then when he was adopted, which actually happened, my parents ended up adopting him. We were able to tell them that trick, and it worked great. So
what I'm hearing from that story is, which I love, by the way, is that in a shelter environment, as much as the staff, as much as the volunteers want to devote themselves to these animals, you're not going to learn and figure out necessarily those little tips and tricks that can help turn a dog's big dog energy into something that would work for a family long term. But when you're spending these day in and day out, you can start to play, start to adjust, and come up with real solutions. So this dog goes from being something that could be a little bit intimidating for some guests to something that absolutely works for your own parents.
Absolutely. And I mean, it is not the shelter. I mean, I think that the issue is that pets just act different often in the shelter versus in a home. And in a shelter, they're kind of constrained because they're physically constrained, but also they can't really show you that full range of their personality because they're only doing certain things. So you're only able to see this like little slice, even if you're, the best shelter in the world doing everything you can. If the dog doesn't leave the shelter, it's very difficult to see the full picture. We've had many fosters who were really struggling in the shelter and just like looked like they were super high energy. And we brought them home and they were just like couch loafs. And it was that was great. Sometimes they were at high energy, but a lot of times it was almost, I would say, just about every time we fostered, it was something was very different than I expected.
Yeah, yeah, that's been my personal lived experience too. I'm curious to hear if there are any myths or misconceptions new fosters consistently have, and how do progressive fostering programs, help people overcome and just realize that those just aren't true?
I think that, well, first, I could go on about this for a while, but I think people don't realize that just because the shelter has open kennels, that animals are fine living in shelters and they don't need fosters. Um, because it looks like, well, they've got, a bank of open kennels there. Why do they need foster? They don't need me. Um, we are really used to seeing pets in shelters and that we've become kind of desensitized to behavior when they're struggling. Even the best shelters cause pets emotional trauma and can damage a pet's well-being. So, bringing a pet home who is in a kennel, even if they look fine on the outside, there's just so much more you learn of in foster and so much benefit to them being in foster that it's really important. I think one of the myths is I'm gonna hurt them if I bring them back to the shelter, and I get this one really. I mean, I really get it, and this is mostly one that if you do a field trip or an overnight. So our first foster was a brindle pit bull type dog who'd been waiting at the shelter for 6 months, and her behavior had deteriorated so rapidly that multiple staff were calling for her euthanasia. She was just really hard to get out of the kennel, jumping and biting on the leash, and stuff. And we were like, well, we'll try. And we took her home for weekend foster. She was a great dog. She was after I gave her a really long walk. She came back to the house and she was a totally different dog. But because it was weekend foster, I had to bring her back on Tuesday, which is because the shelter was closed on Monday. I sat outside in the playground with her and just sobbed into her fur.
Yeah.
Oh, it was just she was adopted 2 days later.
Oh,
Been there 6 months. It's hard. It's honestly if you have to bring them back, often because of what you've done for fostering them, they will go a lot faster. People will notice them because
because they present better, they show up more as themselves, and I know that's not a long term necessarily. The research has shown that it starts to drop off at a certain period of time, but that's so interesting that given that decompression time, and then because so many people come into the shelter given that opportunity for exposure again. Congratulations, though, that's a beautiful story.
Oh, thank you. And I think it's also that so much about this dog. If you go to any large shelter, you will see a lot of dogs who came in as strays and they don't really have any information on, and it's really scary to want to take that dog home because you don't have any information. But if you see pictures of them laying on somebody's couch, that then you're like, okay, here are things we know about this dog. So
Kelly, that is actually, you didn't know that you were walking into this landmine here, but actually that's one of my passion projects that on the sly, I've been thinking about is how can I recruit more short-term fosters to give them that decompression period for 2 or 3 days. I like your weekend idea, weekend warriors of fostering, and then their specific mission. Because I've seen, by the way, and I love the online social media of the person with the backpack taking the dog around, getting them exposure, all good things. I'm not like throwing shame at one way of fostering or the other. We're all coming together as a community. I haven't heard as much discussion, though it might be out there, about people taking a dog home for a couple of days, getting super good behavioral notes, super marketable pictures. And then if there's a foster who can take them over, maybe for a longer term stint, or if there's adopters then that find out about them, but even that more bite-sized way of helping can make a world of difference for that dog. I just love that idea because it's hard to commit to a longer term foster without having, are they potty trained? Are they crate trained? And that is something that's more accessible and doable, I think, for a lot of newer fosterers.
Absolutely, and it's such a good point. And now I'm gonna make it short, but one of our first few fosters was Clyde, and he was just like this giant pit bull who was having serious kennel stress. And when I went to get him, because we had another foster, she was with her respite foster for the weekend, and I was and like Clyde was not going to make it, and I was like, it's respite, but like I got to take him home. I can't let this happen. And so we had him for just the weekend. We had a hard stop on Sunday night that we couldn't keep him, and it was scary. But as I'm walking to his kennel, 3 different people stopped me and they were like, "Are you taking Clyde? Are you afraid he's going to be like a bull in a china shop?" And I'm like, you know what? When we get there, we'll figure it out. That dog was a dream. He was wonderful. And Sunday night here, I'm like sweating, posting about him and showing the pictures and stuff.
We've all been there.
Yeah, absolutely. Another foster saw the photos in the Facebook group, read the story, and she said to me later, she was like, if you hadn't taken him home, I would never have had the courage to try. And he was a great fit for her. And she was able to get him adopted within like a week. So,
yeah. That's beautiful. No, I love your story. So, because that's what it's great that you are a team member of Maddie's Fund and working this, doing this work, looking at programs, doing this, being able to see this at a large, level, and also as someone who fosters, having these incredibly personal experiences of watching these dogs transform. So trust me, don't it's not a bad day for me when I'm hearing foster dog success stories. So I could do that all day. I am curious, we have touched on this lately already. Is there anything else for fostering programs within organizations that they can do? Any best cultural norms or best practices they can set up in order to support and welcome fosters?
I mean, I think considering foster VIPs and really laying out the welcome, and really making sure that they know that they are really valued, I think is a really important thing. I think the culture toward fosters is a really important piece of it. But also things like having a strong structure for your program so that you can support fosters and then communicate with them. If they email, get back to them, that kind of a thing. This takes some work on the shelter's part. Automation can really, really be helpful here. There are a lot of things on the shelter side that they can do to make this more manageable for them. But also good communication, and then like trusting fosters to help with adoptions or to help with marketing and that kind of a thing. I think those are, and then obviously training, like we mentioned before, and supporting fosters and peer-to-peer support.
It sounds like I'm hearing kind of a combination of support and an empowerment side. So that we're coming together in slightly different capacities, but as a team coming around these doggos that we love so much and really setting them up for success. So you've already mentioned some really good research that we're going to include the links to below. But for our audience members who are interested in following Maddie's Fund, thought leadership, or getting access to their resources, where should they go?
Maddie's Pet Forum is a free social media platform just for this field. You can ask questions, you can find and share resources. There's actually a resource library where there's tons of information. And there are even monthly chances to win grants for shelters and rescue organizations. So maddiespetforum.org is the place to go, and you can find any of our resources from there.
Wonderful. Kelly, thank you so much for coming on today. Thank you for sharing your stories from your foster successes, and thank you for sharing this really helpful information. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Dog Fostering 101, everything I wish I knew when I began fostering. This episode was edited by Make Your Day Richer. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to follow us and check us out on Facebook and Instagram. Now go cuddle a pup and have a great day.